Welcome back to another episode, and I'm excited to introduce my friend Betsy Pake. And Betsy is a master mindset coach, trainer of NLP, founder of the Navigate method, where she helps women make big decisions in their marriage. And really, Betsy and I worked together a few years back when I was just starting my company. I had left a business partnership, and it was a really huge transition. It was incredibly emotional. Not only that, at the same time, I found out my son had autism. So I was just really unclear, uncertain, overwhelmed, flooded emotionally, just not feeling energized, focused, strong, none of it. And so I really leaned in and engaged working with Betsy. And the work we did really did provide a lot of clarity, certainty on my path forward. And so I wanted to invite her today to share a little bit about her perspective and the work that she does to see how we can help others that are feeling just not in alignment, not on their path right now, not clear. So Betsy, tell us about that moment. I know so many people come to you at that moment where it's just nothing's clear, you're flooded, you don't know your next step, you're overwhelmed, you're just maybe even drained and exhausted. Like where do you go when you're at that moment of just total defeat?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I think that that's such a good question because there's nobody that escapes that, right? No matter who you are, where you are, what your life is like, you're going to have that moment, right? And sometimes, many times throughout our life, especially as we're up leveling and things are happening and life is happening. And so, one of the biggest things that I think can help to kind of bring this into a place where things feel more steady is two things really, is to know what's true. And by that, I mean to really get clear on where it is your brain is just going off into fear, into outer space with fear and what ifs. And so really bringing it back to what's the truth, what's actually happening right now. And the second thing is to really know how to calm your nervous system, to really bring it back. And I know a lot of people have used tapping, right? But this can be as simple as like really deep intentional breathing to just bring it back where I'm calming my system so that I can get some sort of clarity of mind, right? My front of my brain shuts off, the problem solving part of my brain shuts off when I'm in that like fear state. So bringing it down, bringing it to a place where I feel calm and centered, and then I can start to sort things out. So I think the big mistake is people start like, I got to figure it out, but you can't figure it out until you get it to a place where it can be figured, right?
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember when I first left my business partnership and I started that journey and I was like, I've got this. It's all good. I've already done it, right? What's the big deal? And I think you intuitively knew that it's a whole different ball game for my nervous system and my awareness of my identity to be the person versus one of two, right? And so just shifting and all that responsibility and that certainty in self and that self-trust, just it wasn't there. And it was almost just like shocking to realize emotionally, even though like logically and skill wise I was ready, but emotionally I wasn't. And that was something that I think you really awakened me to, is that, hey, I got to actually get my nervous system ready for this journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything that's expanding, everything that's outside of what you've already done is you're going to have to re-regulate to it, right? That's the big shift. Really, people have to emotionally regulate, nervous system wise regulate, and then they can make change. So I think that this is something that when people don't know, it's alarming, right?
It is.
Because now you've probably made several updates to your system and to your right frame of mind over the years. And then it became more second nature. Oh, I'm familiar with this. I know what to do. I know how to calm myself and how to bring myself to the next level. Yeah. But instead, people beat themselves up and say, oh my God, I can't do this. But none of that's true. It's just you haven't learned. And that
You know,
seems overwhelming in the moment.
something that I really remember us talking about that is really fascinating and still surprises me is I had deeper resistance embedded in my subconscious mind, more generational. And some of the work we did, I really started to see that we were tapping into like my great grandmother. Like I didn't even make sense as to why I was getting that type of her energy, her emotional resistance was in my body. And it was actually fear and worthiness and not feeling like it was right. The path I was on was safe. And it was just, it didn't make logical sense. So I'd love to hear you talk about this generational trauma concept. And does that come up a lot when you're doing this work, this type of work?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a couple different things. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, that seems woo woo, or that seems really weird. Like, I totally get it. But I think there's 3 different things to look at here. One is my unconscious mind organizes time. And so it doesn't have to make sense. It's how my unconscious mind is organizing it. So anytime I'm working with someone and doing this work, I always say, like, let go of the idea that this has to be a certain way, or that whatever it is that you're leaning into or feeling is impossible. Because we ask questions, right, as we go through this process. And when you and I did it, ask questions to say the first thing that comes to your mind, right? Yeah. So the first thing is, when the unconscious, I don't want to try to decipher it or just let it, just do the process, right? So as we're moving through things, when we start to second guess that unconscious mind and where it's sending us. Okay, so that's one piece. The other side of this is, I was in my mother's uterus, right? I was, yes. We can't debate that. But then also, my mother, I came from one of my mother's eggs, and her eggs were fully formed when she was born, which was inside her mother, my grandmother. So on one aspect, the egg that I came from was inside my grandmother. And when we talk about emotion, and so many of the things that hold us back are emotions, patterns, right? Unconscious things that are going on. Emotions are a chemical reaction at their core. Yep. And that is fed through the umbilical cord. Now, can I contain information in my egg from what my grandmother experienced, right? If she had a negative emotion, could I hold that? And there is a lot of epigenetics shows us that there is a lot of evidence that says yes, because from a biological standpoint, it makes sense that I would need to know if every time my family walked by a tiger, that was something to be fearful of, right? So I want to have some of that stuff embedded. So when we do this work, and anytime we go to up level, I think that we've got to look at, there's things that we carry on from this from an epigenetic standpoint. Now, the third thing is, there's also patterns that we pick up from our parents, from our grandparents, that they developed when they were little. So if my grandmother had a belief or a value that she shared with me when I was little, and I kept that belief, and now I'm an adult and that belief is holding me back, that belief could have come from her mother or her grandmother. So now I'm going multiple generations back of me holding on to a pattern and a belief that's not serving me, that came 4 generations ago, right? So there's different avenues sort of to look at this when we go, oh, nothing happened before I was born. Well, we are just little sponges absorbing information, especially when we're little. So all of that makes sense. And again, the biggest sadness in my life is when people go, oh, I can't. I'm not supposed to do it because it hasn't ever worked out. And I always am like, well, did it not work out, or did it not work out because you're running a pattern from your great grandmother? Let's get rid of that, right? And now all of a sudden I've got more opportunity.
Yeah, wow. It's so powerful to hear just all of these deep like programming that's happening and passed on that we're not even aware of. And it's just, I know for me, it was like such a liberating feeling to even just, and a little scary, right? Mm-hmm. Like, whoa, what else is under there that I don't really want to look at? And so as you get people to do this inner work, I mean, it takes a lot of courage to do it, right? So do you see people resisting want to go down these holes of getting to the truth? Because I know for me, some people just don't want to go there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I think I always say the women in my program are really brave, right? Because it does take an act of bravery to look at your own stuff and say, even though I think that's real, and we could get into a whole conversation about reality, right? Even though I think that's real, it's not serving me. And so I want to retrain myself to think and believe something different. That takes a lot of courage because we hold on so tight to our reality, right? We think like, well, this is real. Everything about this is real, but that is true. But that is what happened. And that may be the way you perceived it to have happened. But if it's not serving you, how about we look at it in a different way and see if then the pattern you can create actually propels you forward where you want to go. We don't have to be stuck.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's also interesting just knowing and watching your journey. You've been rapidly evolving and just really reinventing yourself rapidly. And I think that takes such honestly, a detachment to any ego, right, of who you are. And so I'd be curious to hear from you, like, how do you help people break down the ego of, well, this is who I've been my whole life. This is what I've agreed to. And it's just getting to that point of freedom where you get to actually choose consciously, right?
Right. Yeah. I think there is a sense of peace that you have to come to with who you are. Because if you're resisting, you can't see anything else. You know those if you go to a restaurant and it has like the swinging door into the restaurant. I don't know why this is coming to me, but this swinging door, right? And if you put your hand on the door and you don't let it swing, right? So much resistance. Don't swing the door. Resisting what is, then you can't ever see what's inside. You can't ever take a look and see other opportunities. Oh, I was going to get the seafood, but they have steak. I can see them cooking it, right? So what happens, I think, is people resist. They're mad, right? They're angry at what happened in their lives. They're upset with where things are going. They feel disappointed. They're let down, and all of that is fair. But accept it. Be like, that's where I am. I'm not going to fight it anymore. And I'm going to fully accept that I was doing the best that I could with what I had learned. And once you can get to that point, then I think you can start to have the bravery to say, I'm going to do it differently from here. I'm going to show up differently, and I'm not going to care if so-and-so doesn't agree. I'm not going to mind if my parents make a remark about it or somebody shows up, because that's a thing. We think that's not that big of a deal until it happens. And then people restrict right back up and then put their hands on that kitchen door and say, okay, just kidding. And so
it's so true.
Yeah. So I think it's really, you got to get to a place of peace, and then you've got to be okay with everybody else. And here's the thing. It's not them being okay with not liking you. That's not what it is. It's you being okay with them having their own experience. Right? Because they're just having their own experience of you, which probably has nothing to do with you.
It's that detachment of their stories and perception, right? And I think this has been such a tough journey. I know for me, as just going on this rapidly evolving journey and having to slowly become more and more misunderstood by my community, my past communities, right?
Yeah.
And it isn't easy to detach from that, because I think deep down we all crave that love and acceptance, right? So
of course,
tell me about how you've accelerated that process of allowing people to create that freedom and really get aligned with what their true, values are.
Yeah. For me personally, I will say a big part of my transformation, I think, came by just sitting. So I have a chair. I used to have a little old couch in here in my office, but I call it my thinking chair, and I sit on my thinking chair. So instead of avoiding the things that I try to avoid, I will say, I will notice that I'm avoiding, and then I'll be like, I need to sit and actually really dive into that. Like, why am I, as soon as I touch the thing, and I'm an entrepreneur, so things come up in business all the time where I'll notice it and I'll be like, I don't want to look at that. And so that when I notice that I'm doing that, then I'm like, I'm going to go sit and I'm going to sit in my chair and actually think through this whole thing. What is actually happening? What is the fear? What's the old pattern that's running? What is my belief around this thing? And I think there's some sort of, I want to say like settling that happens when you know that you've looked at something, because the fear goes away because you've already looked at it. There's nothing it can do to you now because the thing it was going to do to you was you not looking at it. And then I think from that place, so for me, that was huge because then I got awareness on what I really needed to shift so that I could take big steps forward. And for me, that came from that level, that really heightened level of awareness.
It's so funny that stillness is such a medicine that we all avoid when frantically trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah. And I notice it in myself, even though most of my largest transformations have come from sitting, I'll notice, like, I'll be like, oh my God, I haven't sat in 2 days. I haven't sat in 3 days, and I can feel it, I can feel the constriction. So even though we know what needs to be done, it still can be hard to do it. And I think it's because those patterns that, they operate really well in the unconscious and keeping you like, quote unquote, safe.
It's so true. And I think also what I've experienced from what you're describing is the more space I hold to just become more aware in my body and what's coming up emotionally, it's bringing deeper awareness to what's driving my decisions and where I'm really out of alignment with what's really true to my values and my purpose. And I think now regularly I've got to meditate at least once a day because otherwise I feel, with the entrepreneur mind, it's moving so fast that it's so easy to get out of alignment because of how quickly we're moving and making decisions.
Yeah.
So for you, what does alignment mean to you? I know it's like a popular buzzword, and that's a big part of this podcast is really just living an aligned life so you can have the most fulfilling, authentic life. But what does that mean to you? What does it look like? How do you find it?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in talking to, my guides or the universe, whatever it is, whether it's my own brain, I don't care how you want to label it, and it may just be me speaking into existence, right? So however you want to label that, I don't care. I have no resistance around how you label it. But for me, a big part of being in alignment is being slow enough to have that awareness and to be asking for help, to be asking for, this is what I need. This is how I want today to go. Before I even get out of bed, I have run through my day and said out loud, this is how I'd like to feel today. This is how I want to show up. This is the experiences that I'd like to experience. And I think when we can be that intentional, then when we step out of bed, we already know the path. But most of the time, and I have done this too, so there's no judgment here, but most of the time we wake up and instead of deciding who we are, we grab our phone to remind us of who we are. And I think that throws us off because then we think, oh my God, I'm stuck. Like nothing's moving forward. I can't get traction. But the truth is your reality is changing every single day, but you're replaying an old pattern that's now showing up every day. So it's a new version of the old pattern and it looks like you're stuck, but you're not. Life is a movie. It's a motion picture, right? And so making that determination before I even get out of bed is a really huge part of how I want things to go and what I'm setting up for the rest of the day.
Wow, that's such a powerful ritual and just intentions to tell me, like, when you say deciding who we want to be, Tell us what that means to you, like tactically, and what you're thinking through with that process.
Yeah. So I'm really into, I'm going to say it this way. I'm really into feeling. Like I will feel something. Like I feel. And a couple weeks ago, I was waking up and I was like, I feel like a jellyfish. That was the only way to describe it. I feel like a jellyfish. Like I had no backbone. Like I was floating along, but like things felt like, not, like somebody could step on me at any moment. Like I didn't feel like I don't want to live my life like a jellyfish, right? But that's how it felt. So I will notice a feeling and I'll notice that and name it, right? So I think naming that is an important piece of this. And then I'm like, what do I want to feel instead? So for me, how do I want to show up? I want to feel strong. Like, so I want to feel like empowered. I want to feel like um I'm going to say like above, looking down on situations. So like I'm orchestrating things, right? I am the creator here. I'm like making things happen that I want, like a magician overhead, right? But you don't do that if you're a jellyfish, but you do that if you're a giant whatever, right? So I imagine my thing that I like to imagine is putting a steel rod down my back of my neck and all the way down my spine. You cannot be a jellyfish if you have a steel rod in your spine, right? So like our physiology impacts how we think, right? It's a system.
Yeah.
So if I'm jellyfished, I mean, if I feel like a jellyfish, I'm leaning over, right? I'm like, put a steel rod down my back. Now I'm acting different. I'm sitting different. I'm standing different. The way I'm making decisions is going to be different. The way I'm showing up is different. The way I speak is different. So for me, it's getting that intention in the morning. How do I want my day to go? If this was the best day ever, who would I be? And do I feel like that person now? No. What do I need to do to make that happen? Oh, let me put this rod down. Whatever it is for you, right? Maybe it's you need to imagine yourself growing really big, right? I have had times where I have done this, where I have just imagined myself growing really big. I'm 5 feet tall, okay? So like not a big person. But I've gone into the bathroom and opened the shower door, and I realized once I got in the shower that I ducked. So I was holding that unconsciously, that I was really big, because when I ducked to get under, a 7-foot shower as a 5-foot tall person. So when we create that internal representation, our internal representation impacts our external actions. And so I can change my actions without efforting by changing who I am on the back end. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. It's just interesting to hear your process of getting to that place and state. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So I do have to ask about this new method, the founder of that you've created, the Navigate method, where you're helping women make big decisions in their marriage. I'm sure this is relevant to men too, but I am curious, like, really, what does that process look like? And more specifically, I'm kind of curious, with alignment and values and how that can easily grow apart over time in these marriages as everyone's evolving. And I can only imagine those are some of the most complicated decisions to guide people through.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the important thing to recognize, and the frame that I have on the world, is that the whole world is a mirror to what's happening internally to us. And I can explain what I mean by that. But with that frame, then anything happening in your marriage is an internal representation. And so we use the marriage as a catalyst to do the internal work. So when you're in a relationship, or I think this goes also if you're an entrepreneur, I think there's that, whatever it is you're doing, right? There's your experience is being reflected of what's going on internally. And so we're using that frame of the marriage to do this work internally. And what happens is women start showing up differently, right? They heal their stuff, so they're no longer triggered by the things that their husband does. Now, does it mean they always stay together? No, but they raise their confidence, they become super empowered, and then they can make a decision from a place of clarity instead of from a place of anger and hurt and holding on to old grudges. You're making a decision from a higher place. Do I stay and work this out, or do I go and live my life? Either way, you're coming from a place where you can actually design your life instead of feeling like you're a victim to whatever somebody else is doing, right?
Exactly, right. You can't really make a empowered decision from a victim mentality. So
Yeah.
I am curious, like, what are you like the one that ultimately guides them? It's ultimately their decision, right? They're making the choice,
Oh, yeah.
but
Yeah.
you're creating that framework to get to that point where they trust themselves to make that decision.
Exactly. Trust themselves to make that decision. And so often with women specifically, they've given themselves to their kids, to their husband, to whatever, that they start to lose sense of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so often, and I have done this myself, so it's not coming from a place of judgment, but so often then we go, well, he's doing this thing, so I can't do what I want, right? He's doing it, so I can't. And so we eliminate that. So he can have whatever experience he's having, but you get to decide how you want to live your life. You get to decide how you want to react, right? Your reaction's up to you regardless. And so not my karmic duty to make the decision for them, but I get them to a sense of clarity and also where they can touch base with what it is they really want. They've lost touch of that because they've been people pleasing with everybody else for so long, taking care of everybody else.
I know. And I know I see so many people stuck in that people pleasing pattern, which keeps them kind of stuck from really reaching their full potential. So, that's, I'm sure, part of your work, but how have you helped people break out of that pattern?
Yeah. Really simply getting them okay with other people having their own reactions.
Mm-hmm.
People pleasing so often is like, I don't want you to be uncomfortable because I can't sit with that.
Mm-hmm.
But if I allow my husband to have whatever reaction he's going to have, allow him to own it, it's not mine, then I can make the decisions that are the right decisions for me based on my values and beliefs, which doesn't mean that I'm not doing something for my husband. It doesn't mean I'm not doing something for my family, because that may be in alignment with my values and my beliefs. It just means I'm not always. I'm making a judgment based on what's right for me. Is it right for me to do this right now or not? And then when other people have a reaction to my decision, I don't have to carry that. I can allow them to have that reaction because they're individual people and I can see their reaction and I can sit with that and not be uncomfortable. But that has to be trained out of us, because wanting to maintain everybody's happiness can be a pattern that serves us in many cases, right?
Well, I'm sure getting people more in touch with their truth is also going to free them from a lot of relationships that don't serve them, even outside the marriage, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Because we cannot heal one part of our lives and not have it impact every other part, right?
Yep.
So now all of a sudden I've healed this in my marriage, but now I go to work and I have to make hard decisions at work, and I'm okay if not everybody likes it. That is such a hard thing for women. This was something I realized when I started really posting on social media last year. I got so many negative comments and I was sort of surprised at my reaction. I had to really do a lot of thinking in the thinking chair.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is it that I think their reaction means about me? And can I heal that? Can I solve for that? Because we are so used to having our own feelings and reactions to things, but then scanning the outside world to make sure that's acceptable, right? So that slows us down at work. It slows us down in relationships because we're not being authentic. We don't feel good. We're not happy. And then we blame it on everybody else around us because they're making us do it. But really, it's our own relationship with ourselves that's making us do it.
Yeah, that's so powerful. So I know we're running a little short on time. I want to ask you, how has all this work of the healing, the evolution, the mindset work helped you to create more freedom and wealth for yourself?
Yeah, I think being able to really, really show up authentically and not care what people think about me was one of the biggest things ever. I post on social media, on Instagram specifically, some very direct things about marriage and what I think about relationships and what I know women go through.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not met with a lot of support from everybody in my life.
Yeah.
So I had to come to terms with who is it important to that they're okay with this. And obviously my husband, I needed to make sure he was okay. So he saw every post in the beginning. And my mother-in-law, I was like, I want to make sure you understand what I'm doing and what if this is okay. Nobody else mattered when it came down to it. And that gave me freedom to really talk deeply to the woman that I can help. And that exploded my business, right? Because how can it not when you're telling the truth and somebody knows that you know the path?
Absolutely. It takes a lot of courage to speak about those uncomfortable topics of marriage and the dissatisfaction so many people are feeling. And it's incredibly taboo, but it's healing for you to have the courage to step into that space because it's not easy, right? And
Yeah.
I know it's helping a lot of people. So my last question for you is like, as I know for me, that was a big activation with the nervous system and constantly getting myself more confident with taking up that kind of space with authentic communication. Did that process look the same for you, where you're just constantly having to kind of calm your nervous system, get grounded, keep pushing through it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's layers, right? You move through something and then there's a new layer and you move through that. So I think, it definitely looked very similar and similar to the work that you and I did when we did work together. But I do this work on myself almost every day. And I joke sometimes, I do a lot of tapping. I like tapping, and there's other neuro drills that I really like to do. But the tapping is one that I find I can do, on the road. So I'll be with my husband sometime and I'll just start tapping. And he's like, oh my God, what is happening? What are you worried about right now? But I'm tapping a hole in my head because I know that when something's happening, if I can heal it in the moment, even more powerful, right? So I always say, I'm not going to carry this around. Like, this is not important enough for me to carry it around, but I'm having a reaction to it. So let's just deal with it. So yeah, I think it's doing the work every day. And I tell the women in my program, we're doing this work together for 10 weeks, but then I want you to always want me, but I want you to never need me. So I want you to be able to do this on your own so that you can keep going and keep creating healing in yourself as you unravel all of the layers,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your insight and gifts. How is the best way for anyone that wants to reach out to connect with you?
Yeah. So my website is betsypake.com. It's just my name. And if you go to my Instagram, it's just at Betsy Pake.
Fantastic. Well, we will make sure to link up to those, but thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.